right. Welcome to our service tonight. And we're excited to be back in the book. Perfect book to be studying during the month of January, New Year. Of course, we'll be studying it for the rest of the year, probably, and then some. We've had a few weeks off, but this is our 80th message in our series in Genesis. Last time that we were in it, it was kind of a Christmas message and kind of a Genesis message. It seems like a familiar concept. We studied Joseph and Joseph. And we looked at the similarities between the Old Testament Joseph and the primary New Testament Joseph. And we talked about how both of these Josephs were chosen to fulfill specific tasks, and that both of them were chosen because God found them faithful in the little things. And my encouragement was that if you want your dreams to come true, then be faithful in the little things, and God will put you in charge of greater things. Depending on what your dreams are, your dreams may even come true. Tonight, we're looking at the beginning of Joseph's problems or opportunities, depending on how you look at them. Many of the Old Testament commentators consider Joseph a type of Jesus, meaning that there are a lot of similarities in their experiences. We need to be careful about going too far with that, because none of the New Testament epistles portray Joseph as a type of Christ. I mean, looking back, we see all of the similarities, but Joseph didn't die for anybody's sins. And so we can't take that too far, but it is an interesting study, and we'll look at some of those as we move along. But God never appeared directly to Joseph. He never transferred the promise of Abraham to Joseph like he did to Isaac and Jacob. However, as we examine the story of Joseph and his brothers, it's easy to see some remarkable similarities between them, he and his brothers, and the nation of Israel. In our story tonight, the brothers who represent Israel, the nation, are moving even further away from their father, whose name is Israel, and they are moving further away from the promised land, and they're heading back toward the land from which God had removed them. We see that in the nation of Israel in the Old Testament as well. And then Joseph represents the beloved son who is sent from the Father and who is rejected by his own brethren. He is symbolically put to death and is raised to glory, where he saves not only his own people, but all the Egyptians in the countries surrounding there. So tonight, as we begin delving into the life and trials of Joseph, we'll see one of his brothers do something uncharacteristically right. The title for tonight's message is An Unlikely Hero. We're Genesis chapter 37. I encourage you to follow along as we go through the text. We'll start in verse 12. Here we have the setup of the scenes. It says, "And his brethren went to feed their father's flock in Shechem." Now I have a map here, and I've marked in red. You see Hebron. I don't have my buzzer thing. You got is that available? Thank you so much. It's in my laptop bag. All right. Laser, there it is. Okay, so here's where his father's located, and it's mentioned a little further down in the text. That's where the family's living, and they're going all the way up here to Shechem to take their sheep up there to graze. And it's not unusual for shepherds, nomadic shepherds, to move their flocks around from place to place in order to keep them fed and watered and everything. But it's about 50 miles north of Hebron, so it would have taken several days for the brothers to get from Hebron up to Shechem, because they're going at shepherd speed or flock speed, you can call it that. And so they're not exactly traveling at the speed of light, they're traveling at the speed of sheep. And if you recall, we've talked about Shechem before. Last time they were in Shechem, the two brothers, Simeon and Levi, killed all the men of the city and then looted the city in order to defend their sister's honor. And that caused them to have to leave the area because they destroyed their reputation of their family. At this point in our text, the older brothers they're full-grown men now. We're not talking about teenagers here. We're talking about full-grown men. And Jacob has likely left the management of the flocks to them. I mean, when your sons are full-grown, they start taking over the family business. You just let them run with it. And so Jacob stays behind in Hebron, and the brothers are out with the flocks, and they head up north to Shechem. So the shepherd, they're just watering the sheep. They know that the fields around Shechem are fertile because they used to live there for quite some time. And they may have headed there because they remembered how nice the grazing was, and their father owned a little bit of land up there that he purchased for the men of the city before they killed him. And maybe Jacob actually sent the flocks up to Shechem, and maybe the brothers just took them there, trying to get as far away from home and the dreamer as possible. If that was the case, then they obviously left a message that they were going, because Jacob knows where they are. At least he thinks he knows where they are, because they told him they were going up to Shechem. And in the next verse he mentions that. In verse 13 we have the call. And Israel said unto Joseph, Do not thy brethren feed the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send thee unto them. And he said to him, Here am I. So Jacob calls his favorite son to himself, and Joseph eagerly replies. Jacob affirms that the flock is in Shechem. That's where he thinks it is. That's where the brothers said they were taking him. And so he says, the flock's in Shechem. He has no reason to doubt that the brothers went where they said they were going to go. And he prepares to send Joseph on a mission. And in verse 14, we have the mission. And he said to him, Go, I pray thee, and see whether it be well with thy brethren, and well with the flocks, and bring me word again. So he sent him out of the vale of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. So there we see that they're in Hebron, and Joseph is going to head up to Shechem. Earlier in the chapter, we saw Joseph giving a report to Jacob, his father, of the bad things his brothers were doing while they were supposed to be tending the sheep. It says he gave them a bad report, and that kind of annoyed the brothers. And now Jacob is sending him out again to gather a report on them. Again, Hebron to Shechem is about 50 miles, several days of travel, though Joseph obviously would have been able to travel much more quickly than the brothers because he wasn't held back by the flock. It probably took him a day or two to get there. And then when he gets there, his brothers are nowhere to be found. Given the size of Jacob's flocks, it shouldn't have been too hard to find them in Shechem. So again, he goes up there, he's looking for them, and he gets there, and they're not there. So in verse 15 it says, A certain man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the field. And the man asked him, saying, What seekest thou? So, remember the brothers had turned this town of Shechem into a ghost town a few years before this. But there just happened to be a man who noticed Joseph wandering around in the fields, obviously looking for something, and he goes up to him. I'm guessing that Jacob was probably not looking for the brothers specifically. He's just looking for a lot of sheep, because that'd be a lot easier to see out on the plain. You see a big herd of sheep, then you find out, are those them? But that's what he's looking for. The certain man says, Who are you looking for? And Joseph answers, in verse 16, he said, I seek my brethren. Tell me, I pray thee, where they feed their flocks. So Jacob may have had to describe his brothers to the man. It doesn't really talk about it. I get the feeling we're kind of getting the condensed version of this conversation. They give us the basics of it, but there were probably some pleasantries exchanged, customary. Hello, how are you? Fine, and you? Nice day today? Yep, sure is. Who are you looking for? A certain man has asked this question in Jacob's story. He says, I'm up from Hebron looking for my brothers. They've got these big flocks. They're supposed to be here. They're not here. Maybe describes them as 10 brothers with a really large flock of sheep and a really big chip on their shoulder. He may have described them that way. But the man recognizes them from the description and immediately points Joseph in the right direction. In verse 17, and the man said, they are departed hence, for I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. And Joseph went after his brethren and found them in Dothan. So the brothers are not where they say they're going, and they may have had a perfectly legitimate reason for not being where they said they were going to be. They may have found some resistance in the area that they had destroyed a few years prior to this. They may have found some hard feelings. They may have found their sheep disappearing. It doesn't say, but it says that they moved further on. And now Dothan was a great place to go for watering your sheep. It was, you can see on the map, it's not that far from Shechem up to Dothan. And you've gone that far, you might as well keep going as they get further and further away from their home and their father. I saw the distance, trying to figure out how far it is from there to there, and you wouldn't believe the range of distances given. You would think they would know, somebody would measure it. I saw everywhere from 4 miles, which is a little small, to 20 miles, which is a little far. So we're going to call it 12. Saw that in one of my better commentaries. About 12 miles from Shechem to Dothan, depending if you're on the southern part of the city or wherever. Anyway, Dothan was known for being in a small but very fertile valley. So it's a good place to take your sheep. The Hebrew name for Dothan means 2 wells. And of course, one of the wells is the one that is known as Joseph's well. And I have a picture here. This picture was taken between 1900 and 1920. Through the centuries, Dothan has been discovered and rediscovered and lost and rediscovered. And during the Crusades, someone built a structure over it. You know how they like to worship at these holy sites. And sometime, I think in the 1600s, there was an earthquake that turned those structures into ruins. And then we see on Wikipedia that it was rediscovered in the 1850s by a Dutch missionary. And in his travelogue, he talks about, what is this place? And the Arab who was there said, it's Dothan. He said, what did you say? And he said, Dothan. He said, Dothan? He said, Nam, which in Arabic means yes. Dothan, Dothan, Dothan! Like he was upset that he didn't believe him that it was Dothan. So that's why he recorded it in his log that way. And so he discovered it in the 1850s, and you can go visit it to this day. Don't know what the current status is. Don't have any new pictures of it. There are some newer ones, but it just looks like they built a little structure around it, and then they lined it with bricks, which wasn't in Joseph's day. And the bricks are like black shale, and they say that they're black because they're covered with Joseph's tears. You know, it's just crazy things people do when they want to worship something. But Joseph never worshiped that pit, I can guarantee that. And this pit was discovered by Joseph in verse 18. It says, and when they saw him afar off as his brothers, even before he came near unto them, they conspired against him to slay him. So some commentators or translators take the words that for many, many years we've translated as the coat of many colors, and they say, well, it really meant they just had long sleeves. But I have a hard time buying that, for one thing, because I was raised believing it was a coat of many colors. So I'm still sticking with that, and that's what the King James says is good enough for me. I personally think the correct translation is many colors because his brothers knew it was him from a long way off. And it would be a lot easier to tell the coat of many colors than the coat of long sleeves. You know what I'm saying? So that's just little evidence. But so they see him from a long distance, and their hatred for him was pretty intense. And before he even got close, they started planning to kill him. I mean, you can imagine a conversation that's going on between the brothers there. And the text doesn't give us the particulars on what they said or who said what, but I don't believe Reuben and Judah were in on the plan to kill him. More likely Simeon and Levi, because they're the ones who kind of took things in their own hands and killed when they felt like killing. And it may have also been the younger brothers, you know, the children of the bondwomen, Bilhah and Zilpah. But based on who Joseph throws into prison later, the main plotter may have been Simeon, the one who threw him into the pit the hardest, maybe. Again, because we've already seen Simeon act rashly and violently when they destroyed the city of Shechem. So that's who I think was the main instigator here in this plot to kill Joseph before he even gets there. In verse 19, we see more of the hatred. And they said one to another, "Behold, this dreamer cometh." Remember back in verse 4, I know it's been a couple weeks, where it said, "And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him and could not speak peaceably unto him." They had nothing good to say to Joseph. I hope you never experience that in your homes between your siblings or your brothers or your family members, where they have so much hatred they can't say a single nice thing to each other. But calling him this dreamer, just so you know, it's not a term of endearment. It's not because they love him in his dreams. But now we see that hatred bubble up to the surface as they mockingly call him the dreamer. And granted, Joseph wasn't exactly making things easier on himself by relating his dreams of domination over his brothers and over his parents. But this hatred coming from his brothers was over the top. And what these guys are planning is premeditated, cold-blooded murder. We see their plan in the next verse, verse 20. "Come now, therefore, and let us slay him, and cast him into some pit. And we will say, some evil beast hath devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dreams." So the pits at Dothan had been dug to collect water during the rainy season so that as things dried up, they would still have water in the pit. Pretty common in that area. At this time of year, though, they were dry. And we see that in the verses. But their plan is to kill Joseph and then throw him into one of these dry pits in order to cover up their murder and get his body out of sight and out of mind. So they didn't have to think about what they had just done. And even plan out the lie that they will tell to their father when they return home without him. Because surely he will ask. But then something unusual happens, and we have the unlikely hero. Verse 21, "And Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands, and said, Let us not kill him." So Reuben, Reuben is the firstborn, the eldest son of all the brothers. He's the firstborn. I don't know if this works in homes with multiple wives, but firstborn children are known for having certain tendencies. They tend to be highly responsible, and they tend to be peacemakers. And if you look up the definition of firstborn tendencies, it'll tell you they're reliable, conscientious, structured, cautious, controlling, and achievers. Your experience may vary from this with your firstborns. My wife was a firstborn. She's the one that pointed out to me Reuben's firstborn tendencies. So I found an interesting study thinking about that and thinking of what's going on in the text here. In snatching Joseph from the hands of his murderous brothers, Reuben was demonstrating some of the better qualities of the firstborn. He was showing a maturity of thought and a leadership that we haven't previously seen from him when it talks about Reuben. He's the only one of the 10. He is only one of the 10, so he doesn't have the same authority as his dad. He's just another brother. He has to be the oldest brother, so his authority is limited. And it's one against however many are here in the plotting against him. So Reuben, sound is really weird now. Okay. Reuben is taking a risk here. It's possible that his brothers could just as easily turn on him. They could say, "Oh, so are you with the dreamer now?" And they could kill him and throw him in a pit too. That's a risk he was taking by going against the flow, going against the crowd, standing up for the brother who he hated just as much as everybody else. But as the eldest, Joseph's safety is Reuben's responsibility. The safety of all the brothers falls upon the eldest brother. And Reuben takes that responsibility seriously, regardless of the conflict and possible consequences with his brothers. In verse 22, we have Reuben to the rescue. And Reuben said unto them, "Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness, and lay no hand upon him, that he might rid him out of their hands to deliver him to his father again." So we have Reuben's plan. And we see that here in this picture that Reuben's plan was to pull Joseph out of the pit and deliver him later back to his father. So, see, he's got the little cloud around the picture. That means he's thinking that, and that's what he's thinking he's going to do to rescue Joseph from the pit. Well, let's talk about that. If anybody should have been bothered by Jacob's favoritism of Joseph, it should have been Reuben. It was obvious that the sons of Leah were not being considered in the blessings that Jacob was going to be giving, and that Reuben was not going to be given the double blessing reserved for the eldest sons. That blessing would eventually go to Joseph, and we see that as we continue through the Bible. So what was Reuben's motivation for rescuing Joseph? He had the most to lose with Joseph's preferential treatment. Why did he not just give in to the hate and allow his brothers to have their say? Allow his brothers to kill them? I say that he defied his brothers because it was the right thing to do. By standing up to his brothers, Reuben showed courage and compassion. He did the right thing, even if it meant he would not profit from it. He did the right thing even though it may have cost him some standing with his brothers. And he did the right thing because he loved his father, and he knew his father would be heartbroken at the loss of his son. James 4:17 says, "Therefore to him that doeth it," let me try that again. "Therefore to him that knoweth to do good and doeth it not, to him it is sin." Reuben stood up for the little guy. He defended the defenseless. It may not have been it was not the popular thing to do at that time, but he did what was right because it was the right thing to do. Isaiah 1:17 says, "Learn to do well." It says, "Seek judgment, relieve the oppressed, judge the fatherless, plead for the widow." Talks about doing the right thing. Learn to do the right thing. Doing the right thing was actually recorded into the Old Testament law. In Deuteronomy 6:18, we read, "And thou shalt do that which is right and good in the sight of the Lord, that it may be well with thee, and that thou mayest go in and possess the good land which the Lord sware unto their fathers." God expected them to do right, to do well. And in this instance, by doing what was right in the face of opposition, Reuben actually serves as an inspiration to us. Like many Bible characters, he was not perfect, but he did right in this case. Galatians 6:9 says, "And let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap, if we faint not." You do the right thing over and over and over again, so that in the face of opposition, you know to do right. As I was thinking about this, I was thinking about elite athletes and soldiers. What do they have in common? They practice. They practice doing the right thing again and again and again, so that in the face of opposition, in competition, in battle, they instinctively do the right thing. I remember as a wrestler on scholarship, I would practice the arm drag thousands and thousands of times. You know, it's the guy puts his hand on your shoulder, you chop a hand, chop the wrist, grab the elbow, and pull it past you. Did that, just that part of that move, thousands. It became one of my favorite moves, because if you do it right, as you drag the guy past you, you also trip him, and then he's down and you're on top. And I love that. And if you don't trip him, you're at least behind him, which is a good place to be, because then you can throw him down yourself. But did that move thousands of times, so that in a match it just became instinctive. You reach for my shoulder, boom, chop, drag, and he was down. That's what you do. As an athlete, you drill, you practice doing the right thing. And the Bible talks about, uses soldiers and athletes as an example of how Christians should be. You practice doing the right thing so that the right thing becomes the normal thing. And let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. You don't get tired of doing the right thing. You just do it. And now, we'll stand up and close in prayer. And for our closing song tonight, we'll sing Stand Up for Jesus, number 646. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for the example tonight of Reuben. There's not a lot great said about Reuben, but here in this case, we see him doing the right thing. We see him doing the right thing in the face of opposition. We see him doing the right thing in spite of the fact that he hated his brother just as much as everybody else. We thank you for that example. Pray that you'd help us to be bold in doing the right thing. As things become more difficult for believers here, we pray that you'd help us to stand strong and to practice doing the right thing. We thank you for your word. Ask that you bless our church. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, and may you have a great week this week.